Fintech Chatter Podcast, brought to you by Tier 1 People, the leaders in executive search for Fintech Ventures.
Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where I connect with fintech leaders for a bit of a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today I'm joined by Chris Jewell, who's the CEO of Zepto. Zepto is the smallest unit measurement of time. But we're not here to talk about physics. We're here to talk about the other Zepto, which is a payments business that originated in Byron Bay. Chris, welcome to your Fintech Chatter debut.
Thanks, Dexter. That was actually pretty spot on. Zepto second is a trillionth of a billionth of a second. So for us, it represents precision, accuracy, and speed. So yeah, it's great to be here.
It's fantastic to have you here. It's I feel like I've got another one off the bucket list for the year, and I can go and spend Christmas relaxed, knowing that I've ticked another to do off the list. We've been trying to make this one happen for some time. Yep. So it's fantastic to finally make it happen.
Thank you. And again, I was saying as we were setting up, congrats on what you've built through Fintech Chatter and Tier 1 People as well. It's you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the Tier 1 People mention. Well, we are here to talk about Zepto, not Tier 1 People. And it's a really interesting story on many fronts. I mentioned there in the intro, Byron Bay. We'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. But before we do, could you tell the listeners a bit more about Zepto and what it is that you do?
Yeah, I mean, Zepto is a payments technology company. And when I say payments, we don't do credit card, we don't do BNPL. We focus exclusively on bank account to bank account payments for businesses. So we enable merchants. We don't enable consumers direct. So we help those businesses in the context of managing those bank account payments, the ability to pay out from their bank account to their customers' bank accounts, to receive where their customers are sending them money into their bank account, and equally the ability for those merchants to collect money directly from their customers' bank accounts. So we do that, I guess, across the two existing rails in Australia. One is BECS, or the Bulk Electronic Clearing System, which is that old school direct debit and direct credit. And we're going through a structural shift at the moment into the new payments platform, or the MPP. So that's the space we play in.
Yeah. So new payments platform, it kind of feels a bit odd saying that now because it's over 5 years since it was launched.
Yeah.
What have been, I guess, some of the challenges for Zepto in actually kind of pushing the adoption of that?
Yeah, I think it's been iterative, right? I think if we think about the early adopters in any technology, it's skewed to, for the MPP, it was very much skewed to payouts. Yeah. And I think over the last 5 years, as you said, 2018 is when the MPP went live. It's been about a gradual evolution in terms of that payout into the ability to receive via PayID and now the ability to collect via Payto. So I do think that, I think a lot of people talk about the legacy system of BECS, but I don't think of BECS as legacy. I think of BECS as being a Hall of Famer, in the context of what it's delivered to Australia. And BECS, whether it's ACH in the US, this idea of direct debit and direct credit has been incredibly powerful in terms of the engine for our economy over the last 50 years. The challenge now for the MPP as we push forward and pioneer a new possible, which is engaging in an on-demand digital world that our merchants are now looking into, is that, that BECS capability probably doesn't extend as far as you need to be able to think about how merchants differentiate their product or service through payment innovation.
Cool. So you've talked about some of the challenges there, Chris, of the new payments platform. What was the opportunity then that Zepto could see? Because it's a really, Australia's a pretty kind of condensed when it comes to payments technology. It's probably the area of innovation and fintech where Australia's right up there with the rest of the world.
I think, absolutely. But I think it's not easy, to do payments reliably at scale. So for these large enterprise merchants that are thinking about the world that we're pioneering and moving into, how do you do millions of transactions a month, millions of transactions a year in a way that is indexing into this digital world where it is on demand, and you are trying to think about that customer payment experience, and that is hard. And I think we can talk more about the opportunity and quantifying the opportunity, but I think some of the use cases that we've brought to life over the last, call it 3 years, but recently, I think really shine a light on where the opportunity is, moving away from early adoption into more progressive mainstream application of account to account. John Winters and Wayne Baskin at Superhero, who I know you've had on the podcast previously. Superhero uses PayID to acquire funds. So customers of Superhero get allocated a unique email that's then linked to a virtual account through the Zepto infrastructure. So that enables Superhero to get money in real time from these customers, reconcile it, reflected in the browser basically instantly, so that those customers can then go and buy equity. A recent founder and company from the Airtree portfolio called Fetch, which is a pet insurance, Phil Wilson-Brown and the team. Really interesting use case in insurance where you're not only collecting premiums on a recurring basis, but thinking about how can we enable real-time payments to vets where there is an emergency operation, and at the same time collect the excess that consumers have to make that go seamlessly. Again, complex payment flow, but now can be tackled in a new way with a real-time payment ecosystem that enables that innovation. And the last one I think, which is really interesting, is a digital partner that we're working with called Ozedi, David Field and Anne White, which focus on superannuation, payroll, and e-invoicing. And superannuation for a lot of small businesses, when you're making those payments 2 weeks in advance to make sure you don't get hit with the fines and penalties associated with those contributions, we're now trying to work with real-time collection on behalf of businesses and their employees, and then real-time disbursement into SuperStream with the data that's required to guarantee the payment. So again, it's just incredibly, I don't want to say exciting, but it's just incredible to think that we're pioneering a new frontier here. And I often say to a lot of people, our awareness of what's possible when it comes to payment innovation, and for Zepto, bank account payment innovation, it can't be limited to what is possible. We have to be thinking more holistically about what can we do to change and add value.
One of the, I guess, frustrations that I have as a consumer, particularly when it comes to payments, health insurance is a great example, or direct debits in general. There's just no control that things go out my bank account and then it's, 4 days later, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days later.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, these are, $400, $500, $600, $700, $800 amounts. What is Zepto doing, that will kind of give ultimately consumers, and I know you're a B2B business, but kind of it was interesting just to hear you there talking about who you're working with. None of the kind of big incumbents seem to be seeing this as a problem for their customers. What are you seeing that Zepto is able to do to kind of push that boundary and push and I guess put pressure on the incumbents that we're going to start to see a bit more control for consumers?
Love the question, right? So I think, first of all, I think the incumbents want to be super meaningful to their relationships with their customers. And I think we can break that down in a sec. But I do think, the transparency for the consumer and the ability to understand and see and have flexibility to control those payments and see them aggregated is really important. I think from a Zepto point of view, part of the success of Zepto has been on what we've said no to, not what we've said yes to. And so I think when it comes to really getting deeper and deeper into the consumer side, that's sort of beyond the scope of what we're focused on. We're trying to think about the infrastructure side and making access, so tech API-driven access to the infrastructure as seamless as possible for our merchants so that they can create and customize a really unique customer payment experience that puts their customer first, that then touches on all the things you just said.
It's funny you mention that, because the last podcast that we did with Richard Joffe at Honey Insurance, we had exactly the same conversation, the kind of secret to a successful fintech, and ours is helping other businesses delight and retain their customers.
Exactly. So when I think about, taking that back a step and the custodians or the incumbents. I like to think about the banks being the custodians of the payment ecosystem when it comes to bank account payments over the last sort of 50 or so years. There are two components to a bank account transaction. One is what we call initiation, and the other is the clearing and settling. So both those pieces ultimately and historically, the banks have been able to provide a service. I think the initiation piece in my mind is heavily skewed to technology. So it's the instruction layer, it's the status of the payment, it's the data that goes with the payment. And I think that's where we're trying to leverage into, the ability to create a new, that accessibility to drive technical capability to enable merchants, where historically, if you wanted to extend beyond what was offered by a bank, you called that integration. So merchants would have to integrate back to what a bank offered. And I think going forward now, that concept of integration gets broken down a little bit, and the ability to access technology around bank account capability will start to match what merchants need. So, that's where Zepto comes in. We want to make that as seamless as possible for these merchants to access and create complex payment flows seamlessly. And we get excited about that.
Cool. Now, we can't have a chat about payments without talking about digital currency and crypto, and we're kind of back on the kind of hype cycle again.
Yeah.
Seems to be determined by the price of Bitcoin rather than the use cases. But where do you see the kind of where does payments sit in terms of the rails that we've got now, and then this emerging technology, and what do you kind of anticipate is where we'll end up?
Yep. I think there's sort of three segments here. One is, understanding, for most merchants, you don't have to convince them that a real-time payment experience for their customer is a better outcome.
Yeah.
The hardest thing for some of these large merchants that we're now talking to is like, how do we transition away from an ecosystem that we've built with layers of support around it, that we have to start to peel back and move to this real time. So, the way we approach that is to think about how do we enable that innovation and value for our merchants today, and so in a way that's meaningful for them today. And meaningful is accessibility through the tech. Meaningful is a reliable and scalable solution. But meaningful also is a confidence that what we're building today is composable with the future, which comes to this idea of digital assets, whether it's, for me, like whether it's blockchain as a technology, whether it is AI, whether it is consumer data, right? There's a lot of things that are emerging that will complement a payment capability today. So whoever's building needs to have, one eye today, but one eye on the future as well, because no one wants to integrate and build out for a capability that has a limited life of 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think the recurring theme that when I've asked a CEO or an exec, whether they're in a startup or in a bank, over this last 5 years, Chris, and if anything, COVID just accelerated this, was, you ask them what's keeping them awake at night, and the overwhelming response, was you'd get things like cybersecurity and, other things, but the overwhelming response is what we're building today even going to be relevant in 12 months' time?
Yeah.
And, you think I was having that 5 years ago, and now we've seen cryptocurrency massively kind of push on from there. We've seen AI massively kick on from there as well. We've seen, compounded by that, the downside, which is the risks and the security and the fraud piece, that there's a massive now push here in Oz, but also globally, around fraud and payments, and the issues that we've seen with that Pay ID could quite easily solve, but that we've only just seen some kind of real kind of movement on recently within Australia around identifying pays and account numbers. What do you see? Or what do you hear from your customers as to the thing that's kind of really causing them sleepless nights?
I think, our approach is a governance-first approach.
Yeah.
For most innovators, when you think about regulation and governance and compliance, that slows you down. But I think when we're pioneering, for want of a better word, against a backdrop of critical infrastructure like payment ecosystem, it's not about, moving fast and breaking things.
Yeah.
We have to be slow. We have to be considered. We have to take a very mature lens to how we do this. And fraud and scam, that is incredibly important right now. Like governance for Zepto is front and center. We see it, as being part of an ecosystem of what are we contributing to ensure that the good players we're enabling and the bad players we're collectively putting more pressure on. And I think that is really important. You talk about confirmation of payee now, like Pay ID, where you can send a payment and you can see who that is. Through the MPP, we're looking to expand that to other payment channels so that confirmation of pay will be there. So, what are we doing there, and what are the things that we're being asked? It is about making sure that we're constantly thinking about what more can we be doing, whether it's Connect ID and digital identification to ensure that the payment, if it's guaranteed and irrevocable, that it's going to the right person for the right purpose. Yeah. And I think, where we're at the moment, there's work to be done. But we are investing heavily in that space, and that's something that we're super passionate about in terms of, our impact on, a ecosystem and a community. Yeah. It's really important.
Yeah. It's interesting you mention that, because I think one of the observations that I've got, having been in this space now for 10 years, is everybody claims that they've got the silver bullet, and there isn't one. And it's what's really, from what you said, kind of really cements my thinking that, look, this is an ecosystem, right? It's composable parts that you bring together that's going to create something different. And I think the kind of infrastructure, that we're talking about for a world that's going to be, the digital age, which we're still not there yet, right? We're still kind of very reliant on technology that was built in the analog age. But it seems to me that, the industry really kind of needs to not get together, because I think they do a good job of that, but recognize that, there's not one solution. Yeah. There's, everybody's got something to offer, and it's how do we make all of these solutions work together?
And I think this ecosystem, when I think about our Australian ecosystem, we've got some of the most innovative companies, pioneering in this space. Like, if we come together, we can do a lot of good work in terms of the way that we're pioneering and what we're leaning into. I think, I'd love to see, we're quite active in terms of policy submissions to the government and Treasury. And I think we're big advocates for having a voice. And I'd love, again, regulation and guidelines really help curate the expectation, but all of us need to sort of level up to what the bar looks like. Yeah. And I can see in the future as well, like a code of conduct that we all sort of sign up for in terms of how we're innovating, and the purpose of innovation is to enable value, not to perpetuate, bad outcomes or cutting corners. Yeah. Like, that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the challenges, right, is that we talked before, and I was talking about some of the data that I've seen around how, not only the funding has dropped off, but just general interest online, general interest in podcasts. The Fairweather friends of fintech, we've lost them in 2023. Like, that's for sure. It's been such a tough ride for a lot of us. And I think what that has also highlighted to me was perhaps we had too many people interested in the segment, because what they wanted to do was not change the world, but change their world by building something and selling it for a few $1 billion within a couple of years. There's nothing wrong with that, but in a heavily regulated environment like fintech, and we've seen what's happened in the crypto world when you got no guide rails at all. It ruins lives. It doesn't change lives, but not for the better, right?
100%.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things to kind of come through from this year has just been, one, obviously, we see who's in it for the long game. But I think also now those voices that needed to be heard are getting more of a platform now, because there's not so much of the noisemakers around who perhaps their intentions were a little bit more kind of selfish than kind of holistic.
Yeah. I feel, for any co-founder, leader, entrepreneur, you've got to really feel it. Yeah. Like, genuinely believe in the problem you're going after. And I think, the way we've approached it at Zepto is like, ultimately, we'd love to create value for everyone. Like, every person at Zepto has shares and equity in Zepto. And so we're building together. But without that sense of calling and that real purpose to what we're building with the vision and the mission to go deeper to like our vision's pretty simple. It's a better way to pay, not at a consumer level, but at an infrastructure level. We want to provide the infrastructure technology to enable our merchants to engage with a better way to pay with their customers. And we feel really passionate about the efficiency gains, the opportunity to drive competition for payment services. And we equally feel super passionate about doing that in a way that doesn't contribute instability or create risk in the ecosystem. Like those things are really genuinely front and center for us. We're not trying to, build a business that can make as much money as it can in the next 2 years and then we're out. Like we want to be genuine custodians and stewards for innovation in the payment ecosystem in Australia, but ultimately we've got global aspirations.
Let's talk about the origins of Zepto. So Byron Bay originally split payments. How did you get involved with Zepto?
So it's a good question. I'm a co-founder now, but I wasn't a co-founder from the very beginning. And I think, Split spun out of, two of the original four co-founders I went to school with 35 years ago in Melbourne.
Right.
So we've known each other a long time. I've been in Byron 10 years. They've all been in Byron sort of 16, 25 years. They were owned and operated the world's largest tandem skydive operation up and down the east coast of Australia. They looked at this opportunity to think about payment capability in relation to, they could take a booking from anywhere in the world, but the payment attached to the booking was slow. It was expensive. It came with complexity where you're using agents. And so they started to pull apart this problem. And so I joined in 2020.
Can I just kind of talk about that?
Yeah.
What makes, two guys who've built a skydiving business, then kind of experts in payments, not to say that in a disparaging way, but like, how did they go, oh yeah, we're the right people to fix this problem?
Well, all four of them came from this problem. And I think, so that's Adrian, it's Matt, it's Ian, and it's Trev. And so Ian and Trev, they were the ones that sort of started to think about, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to understand and streamline this payment process from a merchant perspective. Like as a merchant, what am I looking for? And I think that was a really important moment in the history of Split, is like to approach it from a merchant. We're building something for merchants, but with this merchant experience. So we know the pain of what it's like trying to build and scale a business with, the limitations of what is being offered through the incumbent banking ecosystem. And so that was really starting, like, how do we automate that? They'd come from a tourism and hospitality lens, so starting to think about it in the context of that and building out some code and tech that supported that. And I think what they found really quickly was that tech and that approach was extensible beyond just tourism and hospitality. And in fact, the ability for tourism and hospitality companies to absorb technology was probably limited. So it then moved into other areas. And I think that's where, so this is early 2020, I had, engaged with the guys. It was funny. We just, Adrian was walking out of Foodworks in Bangalore as I was walking in. He's like, mate, have you got half an hour to just grab a beer? I'd love to pick your brain on a couple of things. And he sat down and described a business that had sort of circa 12 people. At the time, I think it hadn't done $1 million in revenue. It's probably $750,000 in total revenue annualized, but had big aspirations and ambition about what it was creating, the code that had already been written to support the merchants that they were supporting. And I had, we can talk a little bit more about this, but I'd come from a traditional banking background. I'd spent, best part of 10 years at Goldman, then another 6 running institutional sales for foreign currency and rates here with Citi in Australia. And so I'd bought a farm up in Byron. My family had moved up there, and I was still sort of going back and forth with Citi, and eventually made the decision to leave. So I had sat down with Adrian. I was like, I wanted to find something that I could sink my teeth into. Yeah. I was sort of thinking really hard and long about ideas that I could build. And, when I sat down with them and listened, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to help build and scale a world-class technology company. So I ended up putting in a significant amount of money into Split, which was the first iteration of where we were, and we rebranded to Zepto and really drove the business on this incredible growth journey over those last 3 years, where we went, just to give you some context, we went from under $1 million in revenue to last year just short of $25 million in total revenue. So it's been hard, and we talk about that against the backdrop. At every step of the way, the doors are shut. Like, then you're having to push through. You're having to really believe in what you're building and where you're going. And for us, it's not about just creating revenue for revenue. Like, we want to create and build and scale, as I said before, a global technology company. We want to be a global category leader in account-to-account infrastructure capability. And that starts with the great merchants that we're working through at the moment and building from there, all out of the Byron industrial estate.
Some rather unique experiences, Chris, because whenever I meet a banking executive and they talk about working in fintech, they're talking about how much equity they're getting, not how much they're putting in.
Yeah, well, I think it was important for me, like, to put skin in the game. Like, this is, I feel it. Like, I feel it, how to bootstrap a business. We did our Series A last year, March 2022. So we didn't take like external institutional money. It was our money that drove the business to scale. And I think that is hard. Like, that's really hard. I'd be lying if there weren't days where the challenges is somewhat overwhelming, but you've got to feel, that connection to the purpose and the vision and the mission that you come back to. That gives you that sense of true north. But I think the banking experience for me, like, and this is just me personally, and this doesn't work for everyone, but really helped me understand this lens around governance and regulation and the importance of where we're going now to put that first. And that's something that I've really driven hard in terms of, as we've built out the business, that becomes an important pillar. And equally, just my experience through, working at some of those big banks, what does, the importance of, thinking laterally, the importance of attention to detail, like all those things that you end up, most bankers walking out and thinking, is this skill set can extend to other areas? Like, it absolutely can, but equally you got to find that sense of curiosity and something that you want to apply to.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of emphasis on skill set when really, it's the attitude, the behaviors, the resilience, they're the things that kind of determine whether you'll be successful or not.
Yes.
And even if you've got all those, it still doesn't determine whether you're going to be successful, right? So
there's a huge element of luck. I think before I started, there's this great story at Split where, the team, the guys put on suits and went out to Lismore. So Lismore is where one of the big banks had their regional hub, and we were looking to get a direct debit facility, right? And so we're trying to talk to the bank about, we want to process direct debits for merchants. And so they all put on a suit, got in a car, went out to Lismore. And the bank manager at Lismore said, no, we can't give you this direct debit facility because the risk associated with your business is incalculable. So it was like, at that point, it felt like it was over. Like, and so, there are the doors every month, the doors are shut and you've got to have that resilience to keep knocking. But I think there comes with a degree of rational optimism in terms of you've got to be really considered about how you try and go through the doors because they're shut for a reason. And like, you've just got to think holistically in terms of the approach.
Maybe perhaps, they're doing the right thing for them and their business, and it mightn't be the right outcome for you and your business, but look, that's kind of when the game of risk management. And I think that's what a lot of people, particularly founders, don't understand, is that fintech isn't about sales, it's about risk management.
Yeah, I mean, I massively subscribe to that. And that's why that idea of governance first, we have to, a lot of people will sort of say, well, what are the use cases? I want to know what we're going into. Unfortunately, we don't have all those answers yet. Like, we know that we're pioneers. Like, we are pioneering with the right attitude and outlook and belief in what we can create. But it is a frontier where there is extreme risk at the moment. And we've got to do our best to make sure that as we, go further into into the frontier, that we're doing it with the right, with the right mindset and the right framework to enable the best value. That's not for everyone, and it's certainly hard to engage with regulators and stakeholders against, driving innovation, but protecting and putting a risk-first lens over that as well.
So Byron Bay, it's fantastic place to visit. I'm sure it's a great place to live as well. It's got a lot going for it, but I wouldn't have imagined it being a hotbed for fintech talent, for a scaling business. So where have you gone to find talent, and how have you gone about that?
I think, like Byron, first of all, it's a pretty eclectic ecosystem. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit up there, which you can really leverage. And personally, I've found it incredibly energizing, the hills up there, with some of the people that you find. But on the flip side, it has been challenging, to build and scale a company headquartered out of Byron. And I think I would misrepresent to say that that's where the growth is coming from us as a business. I think we're just short of 80 people now, and there's probably only 10 left in Byron. So even though we've tried to attract and talent up there, cost of living's been very hard. Yeah. There's a lot of challenges as a regional town that have become really clear on, like just housing, cost of living, all of these things that impact. And I think for us, the growth in terms of headcount still heavily skewed to Melbourne and Sydney from a business perspective.
And how have you found leading people when you're not physically there and you're having to travel a lot, and you've got now 3 hubs if you've got Sydney, Melbourne and Byron?
Yeah. And this is coming from like a reformed banker where I like on an FX desk, you're there next to side by side, taking it all in and the energy and the flow. And so I think it's hard. Like I feel, as a leader of any business, if you're having a bad day, that has a ripple effect, whether you're in the office or on a Zoom call. I think for me, you've just got to be conscious of that and lead with an energy and a positivity that brings, that sort of is aligned to what we're doing and how we're building it. But I feel more so now that I really want to continue to index into what does world-class remote work look like. Yeah. I feel, I've had the fortune of spending a bit of time with some of the great founders within the Airtree ecosystem and outside of that. But some of them, and I think of, Ben Thompson at Employment Hero, they live and die by, they've always been remote first, but they've got a world-class remote first framework that at every level of that organisation enables them to have a great culture and a great productivity and a great outcome, but putting remote first. And so I think managing people remotely, I think we need, at Zepto, we need to do more, like to continue to think about, you just don't want to get halfway through the process and say, this is what it looks like. You've either got to be all in to really support a remote first, approach. But, personally, I try to get down to Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere as often as I can, but there's a sustainability point of view as well. So I can see over the next 5 years that we will continue to invest and level up with that remote first philosophy. But that comes, and you'd know better than most people, with challenges around, how we, from productivity to engagement to all of these things. Yeah.
It's been really interesting actually to have, I pride myself on working with the top performers, right? And finding top performers for my clients. And interestingly, a lot have pushed back and said, I'm not really interested in a remote first business because I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm not learning, I'm not developing. I want to be around people. I want to be around people better than me where I'm challenged and I learn. And I don't feel I get that on Zoom calls and sitting in my bedroom. And so it's kind of really interesting to see that, we're kind of reaching this point now where people are recognizing, as well as businesses, that, hey, there are some things that we haven't figured out yet. How do we figure that out?
Yeah, I certainly think that remote brings complexity in terms of, complexity because it's a complex problem we're trying to solve. Yeah. So you need to be together to sort of peel this apart. But complexity as well as like how do we keep people engaged and productive and satisfied in terms of what we're building. I also think at the moment, the conversation, especially for businesses and a lot of the fintechs that are still building and scaling, is that and this is what I say, I think of this myself when I get up. It's like, as the CEO of Zepto, less about me being that, but what does the business need from me in this role today? Like, am I satisfying, what does the business need, and am I satisfying that? And I think you can quite often, extend that prematurely to think, well, what's the business giving me? And I think, right now our business is like, we've got the potential to do amazing things, to be, I say we want to be the 1% of the 1% companies. We don't want to be a great company. We want to be an incredible company. And we've got all the DNA to do that. But right now the business is screaming to get that momentum, to give it the push. And so that needs everyone to sort of align and believe in what that looks like. And trying to do that remotely at the moment is hard as well, because there are days where everyone's hurting. Everyone has got, challenges. As we move into an on-demand digital economy, that on-demand digital world brings its own challenges, with mental health and all these other things. And I think, trying to navigate the complexity of that, the complexity of the business, and to do it remotely, I think is hard. And so, I don't have the answers. Yeah. It's just good to sort of talk about it.
I think it's really interesting though, because, we've seen this, I think we I like to think of building a business as a creative act. It's not, like a structured, and, it's not like a corporate where, look, the machine's already made, you just come in and turn the cog.
Yeah.
And if you think of any creative process, people sitting in isolation usually doesn't, the movie The Shining, right? Like he goes to write a book in isolation and goes mad, right? And tries to kill his family. Now, I'm not suggesting that's but it's a kind of, isolation is a form of torture, right? And it actually doesn't help with the creative process. And one of the things that I've been hearing more and more from founders when I've done these interviews, Chris, something that you just touched on, which is, where do I get my energy from the business? Like, what's it giving me back? I'm not talking about the exit and the financial stuff, but what's it giving me back? And I think one of the things that's been really encouraging to hear is founders recognizing that, well, the things that give me energy are going out and meeting new clients, winning business, right? Things that detract or take away energy away are these things, right? So how do I outsource or get somebody else to do the stuff that doesn't give me energy? And I know there's things I'm going to have to do, right? That's my responsibility. That's going to sap me. But then how do I counter that? By getting some energy back. And, what they've done is figured things out. Like, if I'm going to have to make somebody redundant, I want to have a load of sales calls lined up so I can push on and, kind of get the things that give me energy. And I've just found that's been really fascinating to hear so many people kind of go on this journey of kind of realizing that actually they're more like artists than they are executives, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
We've gone all Byron here, man.
We do, and it's like that's a little bit. We could go deeper on that, but I feel for me the opportunity to define what is possible, I feel Zepto is one of the few companies that can redefine what's possible.
Yeah.
That's incredibly exciting. But equally, as the CEO of a company, by nature, you do get a lot of problems filter up to you that ultimately you've got to make the decision upon. And that is draining, because that isn't like I can put all that on a Thursday and I've got 4 days to think, outside of that. Every day there are challenges that, sit on your shoulder and say, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Stop, all these things, and you just can't. You just got to keep putting one step.
What you've just talked about there, there's and going on a little bit of a tangent, but there's a lot of talk at the minute about fractional execs.
Yeah,
and it's not a new concept, but it's a one that over the last 7-8 years, I've not seen work very well in in the environment that we're in, and for that very reason, right? If you're going to be an exec, right, you got one startup, you got a whole set of problems.
Yeah.
You think that you can take on 3 startups as clients and work part-time and have 3 sets of problems? It's a bit like having kids, right? If you've got a kid, right, a baby, it's tough, right? You have triplets, it's not 3 times harder, it's like 100 times harder.
Exactly. And I would also argue that in the journey from inception over the first 5 years of being a fintech, you've almost got different businesses embedded in that. Like the first year of being in a fintech to the second to third to the fourth to the fifth, different types of skill sets from an executive perspective influence that. So it's hard to sort of be on that journey if you're not in the journey with the rate of change that's happening there as well.
Yeah. What can we expect from Zepto in 2024?
Yeah, I think we're spending a lot of time at the moment, just going back over what we just said, like governance, compliance, regulation, that is really important. How do we think about, advocating for new licensing? The Treasury just put out a piece the other week asking for submissions. We really want to think about what does the governance framework that supports today but also enables value and innovation into the future look like, and we want to have a voice in that. So that becomes really, really important. I think the ability to think about defensibility of margin for companies in payments is really important. There's a lot of margin that's based at the moment around inefficiency, but equally the commoditization of payments. Like we can't make margin just because we're making a payment. We've got to think about the value that we're enabling our businesses and customers for, and how will they pay for that value. So thinking about that is really important to me. And I think the last piece is just more around product evolution and for us, Payto, the ability for merchants to pull and collect with the consent of a consumer or a business customer is we haven't seen that in the wild yet. I think there's 50,000 transactions going through at the moment. It's very nascent, but what does version 2, 3, 4 and 5 look like? And I think over the next 12 to 18 months, that space will move very quickly with some really big brands, and Zepto will be partnering with a lot of the big brands that come to market, which we're excited about. But what does a hypercare look like to ensure not only that these products are fit for purpose for these brands, but for our community in a way that, as you said before, brings transparency to the consumer and flexibility, but also value for that customer payment experience for the merchant. So 24, and I feel like it's going to go quickly again. Do you know what I mean? Like these years at the moment are flying by. So,
it's just startling to me that I think back in 4 years ago, COVID hadn't even happened.
Yes.
and then I think back to 2 years ago and the end of 2021, and everybody was super excited about 2022 because the borders were opening up and COVID was behind us.
Yeah.
It's just, 2022 was a tough year. 2023, people were, be a bit more optimistic. And then we have Silicon Valley Bank hit in March. It's, I'm sure you were a bit like me, that you start to get deja vu from, Lehman's going down.
GFC,
But it is, I think the years do go by fast. We're wrapping up, Chris. We obviously get some fantastic talent listening to this show. What are some of the kind of great reasons for people to consider working at Zepto?
Well, again, like I am biased, but like we have a genuine passion for the problem we're solving, like a passion to create a new possible, to enable a bank account technology to really serve businesses and customize and help those businesses to differentiate their product through payment innovation and a new customer payment experience. So it is complex, but we're tackling complex head on. Incredibly exciting. And that wave is not just in Australia. We've got an ambition to think about, we've been members of the US Faster Payments Council for the last 2 years. We've got a really strong lens to how we can extend that capability into other markets as well. So it's a global value add that we're looking at and thinking about. So encourage anyone who's passionate about payments and passionate about innovation to think about Zepto.
And where can people find out more about careers?
Well, we've got a career page, our internet site, www.zepto.com.au. Has got a lot of the detail and information there. I'm personally very embedded in the LinkedIn community, so always on and welcoming to anyone who wants to reach out there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, Chris. It's been great to hear about Zepto and great to finally get this one in the bag.
Absolutely, Dexter. Thank you.
As always, folks, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're new to the show, make sure you give us a follow. And if you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. It really does mean a lot to me. Until the next episode, keep well. Fintech Chatter is produced by Tier 1 People. leaders in fintech executive search. We'll find world-class leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find us at tier1people.com.